coming up on Chopper's Politics.
Your politics will be even more divisive, even more negative, where people will feel like they're either ignored, forgotten, or even betrayed. And then, God forbid, you get a Donald Trump in this country.
I'm Christopher Hope, the Chief Political Correspondent for the Daily Telegraph, and this is Chopper's Politics. So, there it is. It was the week that Freedom Day was confirmed, face mask chaos continued, and football didn't quite come home, like my English listeners might have hoped. But to buoy your spirits after Sunday's epic game, I have a fantastic gaggle of guests for you on today's show, dear listeners. I'll be talking to Tory MP for Guildford, Angela Richardson, about why she thinks a £1.5 billion tunnel under the Surrey town is the best way for the government to level up right across the country. And Stephen Kinnock will join me to talk about why he's leading a fight back to win towns and villages for the Labour Party. But first, the woke agenda, being cancelled, the culture wars. They're terms so overused, certainly on social media, that they are at risk of losing their meaning. But for many, the culture wars are a real thing. And legendary American pollster Frank Lutz is worried about it. He's been in the UK for 6 weeks polling us Brits about wokery and the culture wars for the Centre for Policy Studies. And he has some stark findings. Frank Lutz, welcome to Chopper's Politics.
It's a pleasure to be here. I was told to talk me into it that this is the most listened to and most credible podcast in Westminster. So I don't know how you earned that, but congratulations.
Thank you for saying that unexpectedly. Frank Lutz, what's wrong with woke?
What's wrong is that it silences legitimate debate. It intimidates legitimate criticism. It says that people have to fear for their jobs or fear for their reputations because of their points of view. And that's not the way society should work. That's not the way a democracy should work. What is also wrong is the discussion around woke, because both sides are trying to trigger it. Both sides are trying to accuse the other of playing into this culture war. And I will tell you, as an exile from the US 8 weeks ago, it is not a war you want to wage. Unlike most others, this war doesn't end, and both sides get hurt, and it's simply not good for the economy and not good for politics.
You called it an as yet undiscovered tumour at the heart of Britain. What do you mean by that? Is it a cancerous growth that can be fatal for parts of this country?
You don't realize that it exists until it is so upon you that it's too late to do anything about it. It's almost like COVID, because it's worse than COVID because there's no vaccine for it. Once you poison the intellectual well, once people decide that they have the right and they want to write people or write ideas out of their lives, then they lose the benefit of debate, of being challenged, of learning, and society is hurt by it. And I'm here to issue a warning to you. You are 18 months, maybe 2 years behind the US. Don't follow our path. We got it wrong. You need to get it right.
Do you understand that wokery comes from a good place? Essentially, it's people looking out for other people. It's people trying to look out for offence where it might be and calling it out in defence of a minority group. So it comes from a place that is intended to be good and has been warped on Twitter.
And not only is it intended to be good, it's actually important. There are examples of discrimination in this country, as there are in the US. They should be rooted out and people should be held accountable. There are examples of bias, of gender bias, of racial bias, and people should be held accountable for that. There are wonderful examples of people who have challenged the conventional behavior or challenged society overall, such as your football manager. What he did in explaining why players were taking a knee was brilliant and was helpful and productive. I want to praise Gareth because I thought he did a brilliant job. And if those who are listening to this haven't heard it or haven't read it, I want them to go back and read it, because you could not deliver his message in a one-sentence tweet. He explained in tremendous context his respect for those who were opposed to the players, but why he backed them and why what they were doing were good for society. It was more than 1,000. It was probably 1,500 words, so it was longer than a traditional op-ed, and it's exactly what was needed. We can't boil everything down to a tweet. We can't boil everything down to a 2-minute and 20-second video. There are some things that are so complicated that they deserve a full airing. But the problem with woke is you often don't get that chance to do it.
Frank, you found in your polling, which was published at the weekend, that 37% of Britons think this is a racist country. Do you think that might show why wokery is a corrective to that?
I'm just curious, are you playing devil's advocate, or are you actually all in, fully supportive? Because that certainly sounds like you are.
I'm not fully supportive of wokery at all. I'm just trying to challenge you on it. I'm trying to have a debate about it. If we all agree on the same thing all the time, it's hard to have a good chat about it.
So what I asked you, and you just came clean about your motives, would be very difficult to do at a university setting, or could be difficult to do in a society that allowed academics to punish others, that allowed, and by the way, this is not issues of boycotts or challenges, because that's perfectly appropriate. If you don't like something, you shouldn't be forced to consume it, but you shouldn't be denied it either. And I think that that's the issue. But there's something more fundamental, and it's what shocked me the most about the research, and where I try to draw the greatest attention. 42% of the population feels invested in the UK. That's less than a majority. But even worse than that, only 27% think that their country is invested in them in their future. 27%, which means that 3/4 of the people that you're walking by don't feel that their country is invested in them. That's awful. And that's not an issue of wokery. And it's not a left-right issue. It's not a young-old issue. It's not a north-south issue or all the other divides. When only 27% feel that their country is invested in them, you know that you got a problem, an economic problem, a cultural problem, a social problem, a political problem. That's what we need to address. And frankly, we need to do it with Conservative and Lib Dem and Green, SNP and Labor. Everyone needs to be involved in that. That should have been, frankly, the conversation that my polling had presented. That should have been the thing that woke everyone up. But instead, they focus on woke.
I was shocked, Frank, you found that 28% of all people have stopped talking to somebody else because of something political they once said. I mean, is that what we're like now? We just have shut off any kind of debate about anything at all?
Let's get more specific. Over 50% of 18 to 29-year-olds have done it. Only 14% of those over age 65. And you see that I know the numbers. There are over 1,000 pages of crosstabs, but this is one of the points that I think is most important. The young generation, which thinks of itself as being woke, which thinks of itself as being tolerant and open-minded and respectful of others' points of view, half of them have written someone out of their lives for politics. So the generation that thinks of itself as being most tolerant is actually the least tolerant. And that's going to be a challenge for your country. How are you going to say to these people? And by the way, I think they're getting their messages that they can do this from either people who are teaching them or their friends who are around them or social media that encourages this. Something is happening among the next generation that isn't good. And in fact, it's actually poisonous for the society. And that's where we should be focused on. Why do so many young people think that this is a good thing in life?
Is that because they're so influenced by social media, do you think? Because that's the sewer through which woke has flown or swum, I suppose, from the US. Is that how you see it?
So I had a gentleman who I would like to cite, but I'm not sure if he would appreciate it, a former leader who said to me, which are you more afraid of, the sewer or the sewage? And that's a fair point, that it's not just about the capability of communicating this negativity and this ferocious partisanship that exists on social media. It's also the people themselves who are writing the posts and writing the tweets. I think that what would be awesome is if we all could step back and we all could be quiet. I would love to see a moment of silence in America and in the UK for us to contemplate how we treat each other.
Yeah.
And I know this sounds so left-wing, it sounds so 1960s, but I actually think in 2021 with COVID, with these divisions that we've had, with the challenges to the economy, with the fact that we've been shut in for a year and a half, I think it's time for us to have a great reawakening and reimagining. And by the way, I do want to emphasize that my positions on issues, we call it affirmative action, you call it positive discrimination. My positions on society have changed since George Floyd. They have changed as I've begun to mentor students in America within the Black community. I've seen with my own eyes and I heard with my own ears examples of bias, of racism, of things that are so offensive in my own country and in yours. I was at the match in Wembley on Sunday.
Yeah.
And that's why I agree with you, even though you're playing devil's advocate, these issues need to be addressed. I hear it. And we can't just say, well, we're not addressing it the right way, so don't address it at all. The way that we end woke, the solution to woke is to remove the conditions by which it is created, which means, number one, give everyone a voice and guarantee that. Number two, spend more time listening than talking. Number three, actually seek out those who disagree with you to challenge you, to educate you, to inform you, because that's the best way for you to really understand what's happening and whether you've got the right answers or not, is to hear those who don't have your answers. And fourth, and probably most important, actually get educated. And you can't get educated from a tweet. You need to read a book. You need to watch a documentary, which the British do much more. I mean, I've been spending my time watching these great BBC documentaries. I love it. I don't really need to go out to the pub. I'm going to make myself so socially unacceptable right now. I would truly rather sit in my flat and watch a BBC documentary than go out to the pub that's across the street from me.
I'm not sure I agree with that. Normally we record this podcast in a pub and I would be meeting you in a pub, so I wouldn't entirely agree. Do you think it's right that people should lose jobs for tweeting grim things at other people? I mean, I suppose that's not wokery. That's just basically decency, isn't it? I mean, you know, that's okay, isn't it? If you tweet something horrible at somebody, that should have repercussions of you in your life.
Yeah, it should have repercussions, but maybe not lose your job. If I say to you that you live in a horrible home and I can't understand why anyone would ever spend time with you, that just makes me a jerk. But I shouldn't be fired for it. If I call you out for hate speech or I encourage people to hate you, that's different. And I think that the problem with wokery is that it doesn't allow us to distinguish what is awful from what is truly unacceptable. And I'm just afraid that the politicians, when they touch this issue, this is why I don't want this to be a political issue. I think anyone who plays on this in politics, other than making the statement that a faculty member should not be fired, that a statue should not be taken down, and the statues I think is the least important. I'll say something which will get me canceled with some people. I think this trans debate is ridiculous. It affects a tiny, tiny percent of people. And you've got much greater issues, economic issues, social issues, divisive issues, political issues, cultural issues that are more important in this trans debate. How much time is spent on it? I refuse. This is the only time I've talked about it since I've been here. And it's only to respond to what you said, that it is not just divisive, but you are spending time on something that is so less impactful for over 95% of the country that I see it as a painful, unnecessary distraction from what needs to be addressed. what needs to be fixed, and what needs to be discussed as we come out of COVID.
Well, the trans debate is about women, isn't it? And who can say they are a woman nowadays? And you think that's something which barely touches most people and shouldn't be given the airtime it gets?
Just show people with respect. If you're one of those people who are going through a gender transformation, okay, absolutely. And respect them and respect their choices, respect their decisions. Don't ridicule them. Don't embarrass them. But don't spend so much time on this.
What's the answer here, Frank Lutz? I mean, it's great to have you on. A real privilege to hear from you. Do you want to see, for example, our leaders, our company bosses, church leaders, universities to be much more robust at pushing back against wokery? Because there's a feeling that they go into a crouch at the first sign of what's called a Twitter pylon in this country. They kind of sort of fire people or they ban things. Has that got to end?
I actually want corporate leaders to stay out of it, as do the British people. In our polling, getting involved in social issues is the single lowest priority. They want the consumers treated well. They want the employees respected and paid fairly. They want their communities to be celebrated. And the lowest priority of them all, when we gave them, 10, 12 choices, is being involved in social issues. Business community in this country should focus on what matters to their people, however you define it. And what doesn't matter to their people are all these divisive social issues.
And in terms of government, do you think there needs to be more teaching in English schools or all schools of a more positive view of our history? Because you talked quite movingly, I think, about, you look around at these amazing buildings around you in London and some of them are older than your country, but there's a kind of growing ashamed feeling about the past here, which hardly captures the whole meaning of what happened.
We have the issue of slavery. You have imperialism and colonialism. We're not perfect countries. We've done things that we should acknowledge. I don't want history to be positive. I don't want history to be negative. I want to teach exactly what happened, why it happened, put it in context, because behavior that was absolutely 100% acceptable in 1800 was not acceptable in 1900. And what you could do legitimately in 1939, you could not do in 1945. This is adults behaving in an adult-like fashion. Let's acknowledge the mistakes. Let's learn from the mistakes. By the way, I have no issue in museums of focusing on this, of focusing on things that went wrong. This is what the public would say. Use common sense. Just act sensibly. Let's talk about the issues of imperialism, but you know what? Some countries developed, some people benefited. Britain was the source of so many discoveries from 1900 to 1940. So much science, so much technology, so much innovation. Society really benefited from the United Kingdom in those 40 years. So celebrate it.
Yeah.
At the same time that you say, well, you know what? We've got some of our crown jewels came from places that maybe we should consider giving them back, that some people did benefit in a way that while other people were harmed. Just tell the truth. That's all this is about.
The problem is the truth is your truth, my truth is a kind of American thing that's coming here, isn't it? But a truth is now being more contested. Look, just finally, Frank Lutz, where will all this end? You said at the beginning we're 18 months to 2 years behind the US. Sketch a picture of where this country will be in terms of woke in 2 years if we don't take action now.
Where 85% of your faculty in the university will be left of center, and there will be no voice for those on the right. Where students who take a right of center approach will find themselves ostracized and even punished for taking that point of view. Where your politics will be even more divisive, even more negative, where people will feel like they're either ignored, forgotten, or even betrayed, and where life will just not be as open and honest and productive because society is so critical of each other and people are so afraid. And then, God forbid, you get a Donald Trump in this country who literally, by his tweets, now his emails, and his statements are destroying the credibility of democracy as we know it every single day. That's the consequences if you don't do anything about it. So, do politicians need to speak up? Kind of. But not to stoke these culture wars, not to encourage wokeism, but to ask for the truth. And we have a great line in the States: the truth shall set you free. The truth can be ugly. The truth is sometimes difficult. I know that as I examine my own role in politics, sometimes regret the things I've said, or even in a couple cases, the things I've done. But through that reflection, it makes me more constructive. And it's the reason why I'm here, why I left the States for 8 weeks, to try to explain to a country that I love very much, a country that gave me my degree in the university, a country that has been very good to me and very good to my country. It's amazing that we were at war with each other 250 years ago, and now I do believe in the special relationship. I'm grateful for that, and this is my thank you. And that's why, and I leave in a week, and hopefully I will leave a country better informed and better able to tackle these very difficult cultural issues that have done so much damage in my country.
Well, Frank Lutz, over here with the Centre for Policy Studies and on the way back to the States soon. Thanks for joining us this week on Choppers Politics. Thank you.
Thank you.
A fascinating and, I think, nuanced discussion there with Frank Lutz. I would love to hear what you think, though. Please do email us. We're at chopperspolitics@telegraph.co.uk by email, or on Twitter, we're at chopperspodcast. Right, do stay with us for now, though. We'll be talking in one moment about whether the South East is losing out in levelling up. Right after this.
Hi, listeners. I'm Claire Cohen, the Telegraph's women's editor, and the host of another podcast that might be just up your street. Even saying that gives me imposter syndrome. But that's what the show's all about. If you've ever had that niggling feeling that you don't belong in the room, that you feel a bit like a fraud and could be found out at any moment, this one's for you. Over 6 episodes on my podcast Imposters, I meet a woman at the top of her game and find out how she defeated self-doubt to get there.
I've been conditioned to think that I should be at the bottom of the hierarchy ladder, and therefore it's a miracle that I'm even where I am. Let's give myself credit for that.
I'm not someone who walks into a room with entitlement. I never have.
You can either choose to live in fear, or you can think, how can I make the best of today? And that's a conscious choice.
You can find it by clicking on the link in the episode description, or search Imposters wherever you're listening to this.
And we're back. Now, on Thursday this week in Coventry, the Prime Minister was at pains to reassure MPs from the South that the government won't make the rich parts of the UK poorer as it pushes on with its levelling up agenda.
Let's be clear about the difference, the philosophical difference between this project, levelling up, and levelling down. We don't want to level down. We don't want to decapitate the tall poppies. We don't think that you can make the poor parts of the country richer by making the rich parts of the country poorer.
This balancing act between red wall seats and the long-standing Tory heartlands was always going to be hard for Boris Johnson. But someone who's keen to make sure the South East isn't sidelines is Angela Richardson, Tory MP for Guildford. Angela made an impassioned plea for a slightly unusual infrastructure project in her constituency this week as part of the PM's levelling up plans. So I couldn't resist giving her a call to discuss it.
Let's go to Angela Richardson. Angela.
Mr. Speaker, too noisy, too much air pollution, and too much time wasted sitting in traffic, impacting productivity. The A3, as it narrows through Guildford, has been the cause of frustration for decades. According to Highways England, there are no more sticking plasters, which is why I'm calling for the A3 to be tunnelled under Guildford. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that as we build back better after the pandemic, investment into major road infrastructure solutions will be an important part of delivering on the levelling up agenda right across the whole country.
Minister.
I thank Honourable Run. I know the stretch of road that she refers to very well, as I'm sure many members across this House do as well. I would love to be able to clip my fingers and say that we could tunnel under Guildford. All I can say is, Mr. Speaker, in all candor, we will certainly look at it.
Angela Richardson, that was you asking for a tunnel for the A3 under Guildford. How much would it cost?
Well, estimates are about £1.5 billion. I know that sounds expensive. It is probably the most expensive project that has been discussed over many years now. The other one being to bypass the A3 around Guildford. But unfortunately, a lot of the land around Guildford that isn't sort of urbanised is either area of great landscape value or it's a triple SI area. And there is a lot of interest in preserving and protecting that. So the tunnel is probably the best idea, even though it's the most expensive one.
And how long have people locally been campaigning for a tunnel under Guildford?
So, a little bit of work went into it around about 2013, 2014. And it was fully expected that some sort of improvement would happen to the A3 as part of the road investment strategy, linked to 14,000 homes coming online as part of the Guildford local plan. When the latest road investment strategy was announced, there was nothing there for widening the A3. So in terms of a campaign, it's something that I've launched because I feel it's very necessary just to bring everything together that we need infrastructure-wise for Guildford. But it's certainly something that's been discussed in years gone by. And it was time to ask the question, I think. It'd be very easy for me to say, all the money's going elsewhere in the country, don't bother asking for Guildford. But we know that these sort of road investment strategies, as they come along, the next one will be about 2035. And if I don't ask now, we're not going to have anything at all for the future. And the life of the local plan is up to about 2032. So even then, asking for it in the next round of funding means it won't line up with the current local plan period.
And also, voters in Guildford must look with envy at the money being spent in the north in this Conservative dash for votes to try and win round these red wall seats.
Well, it's interesting you say that. I'm not sure that they look at it entirely in that way. The people of Guildford are very kind-hearted. They are philanthropic.
Of course they are.
I mentioned that in my maiden speech. We do actually have pockets of deprivation in my constituency, and local people give as much as they possibly can in order to help. And, when I was elected and I looked at this promise of levelling up, and I've seen the money that's going into the town funds and to improve high streets up in the north, and also to improve education, the buildings. It's about the hard infrastructure. I don't look at that and think that's not fair. I think about time, and I'm sure a lot of people in Guildford feel that way too. But a common issue that has been raised for years and years is the amount of money that is raised in the southeast that goes into the exchequer, that we then rightly see being distributed, but we've got to make sure that some of it comes back, because the economy in the southeast, it really is the driver of the ability to be able to level up. And if we try and dampen down the furnace in the southeast, we will actually make that process take longer. We've got to throw a few more coals onto that fire, get it absolutely humming, so that as we recover from the pandemic, the recovery takes place everywhere.
Boris Johnson's made a speech on Thursday answering that point, he thinks, by saying it's not robbing Peter to pay Paul, it's not zero sum, it's a win-win by this levelling up agenda. But the point about public money is it is limited. So your concern is if you do ignore the South East, then over time you will see less tax coming into the exchequer.
Yeah, I think that's exactly my argument. And I know he doesn't want to ignore the South East, and I know this is about the sort of places that have been left behind in the country for decades. We've got to make sure that they're not left behind anymore. That was part of the whole Brexit argument. It was just making sure that people felt that they'd been listened to. But I've got communities in my part of the world that feel left behind as well. We've just got to make sure it's not about the North and the Midlands, because there are pockets of deprivation in the Southwest. Average earnings in Cornwall are about £10,000 a year below the average for the rest of the country. So, I think we can all in the Southeast look at the country, because it's our jobs not to just represent our own constituencies, but look at the national interest and look at what is best for everyone. But this is very much linked to, I think, the issue about housing and the overheating that the Prime Minister rightly talks about in the Southeast. But we also have to keep growing. I've got a huge local economy of about £5 billion. 40% of that is my university and research park. The research park is doing really well. They want to have more companies coming in, to look at investing in the science and the research that we need in this country that the Prime Minister has also talked about spending money on. But those people need to be able to afford homes locally. And my key workers in my hospital, which is a huge part of my local economy, and the teachers in the schools, they need to be able to afford houses too. So, it is really finely balanced, all of this.
These government's planning reforms in England, are they concerning you locally, or are you at ease with them?
So what I'm doing is having conversations constantly with Robert Jenrick and with Chris Pincher, also the Prime Minister, and just making sure that they understand what the local feeling is. It's just real concern that we are building 14,000 houses as part of the local plan, but that the infrastructure is not coming with it, and that it is crumbling because there's an awful lot of pressure on it. So it's not just roads, it's sewage infrastructure, it's flooding problems that we have. It's the concern that whilst a lot of the Guildford part of my constituency is greenbelt, in the Waverley part of my constituency, it's countryside beyond the greenbelt. And that's a free-for-all for developers. It's about making sure that developers build out those planning permissions. And if the government can bring along a levy to encourage those developers to not sit and land bank, and therefore we see houses going onto pristine green fields and not having the infrastructure come with that, then I think people will feel a little bit more certainty locally about where we're going with planning.
What do you say to people in the north of England who might say that places like Guildford have had a large share of the pie for a long time, and now it's their turn to receive the investment that's gone into the south for so long?
I would say to them that it's really important that the government is trying to do everything to improve people's lives, to make them better, to make them healthier, to make them greener, but to make them fairer. And I think fairness is going to be, hopefully, the watchword of this government. And, it is right, but it's also got to be fairer for, I've talked about the pockets of deprivation in my constituency. I think a lot of people talk on very black and white, very dividing lines about the north and the south. I've said before, this goes right across the country, which is why I'm keen to see levelling up talked about right across the country. But I want to see their lives improve. I think we all do. We all benefit from that. As you said before, it's not a zero-sum game investing across the country. It is better for everyone. I think my focus is on making sure that I'm listening to the people of Guildford, that I'm making the case for them to the most senior parts of government. The pandemic's made it really difficult to get on the doorstep, but as soon as that opportunity presents itself, I will be out there listening to the people of Guildford. And government is listening, and I think that's probably going to be very clear in what the Prime Minister has to say about the levelling up agenda.
Angela Richardson, MP for Guildford, thank you for joining us this week on Choppers Politics. Thank you. Now, staying with levelling up, while the Tories might be worried about the encroachment of the Lib Dems in their traditional heartlands, Labour have, of course, been trying to claw back their influence in key areas, particularly market towns. Now, a new party pressure group is warning that voters in those areas are blaming local Labour councils for austerity and seeing Tories as a chance for change. The group is called Renaissance, and it's urging Keir Starmer's party to focus on spending and jobs, rather than getting waylaid with culture war arguments. Renaissance's chair is Labour MP for Aberavon, Stephen Kinnock, and he joins me now. Stephen Kinnock, welcome back to Choppers Politics.
Hello, good to see you again, Chris.
Great to see you. Sorry we can't meet in the pub this time, but we'll be there in the autumn, don't worry.
Fingers crossed.
Why Renaissance?
Well, we have formed Renaissance because of two drivers, really. One is we feel that the Labour Party has a moral duty. It's a moral imperative to represent the whole country. And what we saw in December 2019 was the result of 10 to 15 years, really, of decline in support for us in communities where they're outside the major cities, where there's relatively large number of people who don't have a university education, and generally speaking, older population. And it is our moral duty as a party to represent those people, to win their support and win their trust. And the other is a very clear piece of electoral maths, which is if you look at the 124 seats that Labour has to win in order to form a government without needing the support of any other party, 104 of those are in towns. They're outside the major cities. So Renaissance has been formed to make these two very clear points that we must, as a party, stand up for those communities because it's our moral duty to do so and a political imperative. But if we have any serious chance of returning to government at the next general election, these are the communities that we have to reconnect with and re-engage with. We know that there's going to be huge change in the labour market, driven not only by the pandemic, but also by the need to get to net zero, huge impact of technology. And I think the Renaissance was actually about the future as well. I mean, you look at the incredible innovation that was driven during the Renaissance period, and you see that it was a very future-facing movement. And that's what we want to be as well. We are about reconnecting labour with those communities, but with a message which says we need a modern manufacturing renaissance. We need to be giving people good, secure jobs that will drive productivity. Those are messages which resonate both in the big cities and in towns. But the way in which we deliver those messages and who we are primarily engaging with has to reflect the fact that Labour has been losing support in these places. And we've got to recognise that those people, you might say they hold communitarian values, very closely associated with the place that they live in, a kind of quiet patriotism, reciprocity and respect and contribution at the heart of everything that we do. Those are messages that we have to reflect in what Labour's doing and saying.
And these sound the ideas which many of us think Labour need to go towards in order to start winning over Middle England again and having a chance to be re-elected.
Exactly.
Is this a return to New Labour? And that's your concern. You'll be attacked by the left, won't you, for this?
I don't think it's a return to anything. I genuinely see this as the word Renaissance also reflects the fact that our country has been through an unbelievably turbulent time over recent years, obviously leaving the European Union and then the pandemic, massive political, social and economic upheaval. So I think this is a turning point for the Labour Party. It is something genuinely new. It's not 1945. It's not 1964. It's not 1997. We've got to stop looking backwards. We've got to look forwards. Of course, learn from our history, but not be beholden to it. And there's a debate in the party about the direction that we take. And there are those who feel that we should be doubling down on the increasing support we're getting in the major cities. And those of us in Renaissance, we beg to differ. We are very clear that if 104 of your 124 target seats lie outside the major cities, it's pretty clear and obvious where we need to go.
You talked about a quiet patriotism. Why not then come out in favour of a new replacement for Royal Yacht Britannia, Stephen Kinnock?
Yeah, I think there's so much more that money could be spent on and should be spent on.
It might generate things for the economy.
Yeah, we're in the midst of a global pandemic. We've got a government that has refused to take the bull by the horns in terms of the future of social care, has got a so-called levelling up agenda that nobody really seems to quite know what it means. We have a steel industry, my constituency, biggest steelworks in the country, in real need of support and investment so that we can manage the transition to a cleaner, greener future. Those are the things that the government should be spending money on. And I think that, as I say, the quiet patriotism for me is there is something very understated about British patriotism. There's something quite elegant and dignified that you see in the communities that I represent and many others. And I don't think having a big flashy yacht with a sort of massive Union Jack painted all over it, I actually think that's out of touch and out of step with the spirit of British people.
The problem that you may have is we're seeing a lot with this government. If you lived in a Labour seat in the north and you're promised, if you vote Tory, then you might get lots of money spent on your community, new roads, the levelling up agenda. Boris Johnson's giving a speech on Thursday about this. How can these ideas you've got, good as they are, combat the promise of actual new roads, new facilities promised by a Tory government?
We have a fundamental problem as a party, which is we haven't been in power since 2010, and we have to, first of all, get a hearing, Chris. I mean, the challenge we have is that, unfortunately, due to what's happened with the Labour Party and our previous leadership, the issues around Brexit, trust is at a low ebb. And trust in politics in general is at a low ebb. I would say that there's a lot of cynicism as well about what the Conservatives are saying and doing, but because they're perceived to have got Brexit done, because they're perceived to have delivered on the vaccine and on furlough, there's more trust that they can deliver, although there is a lot of skepticism about that. That's why just talking about policies for us isn't really going to work. We first of all have to tell those compelling stories about the future of the country and how and why we would do things very differently to the way the Conservatives are doing that. And once we have that permission to be heard, then I think we have fertile ground for our policies to actually be listened to and take root. But to get that hearing, you have to have a very small number of compelling stories about the future of the country, and you have to then repeat them incessantly. The party has to commit to that and not jump around from one thing to another, but actually really go for it. And we will be coming forward with our proposals for that small number of compelling stories about the future of the country should be. It'll, of course, be up to Keir and colleagues to decide where we go on this, but we really do need to start doing this as a matter of urgency.
You mentioned the B word, Brexit. Is Renaissance's position on that it is a done deal? It won't be reversed? That might be a start.
Yes, that is very much our position. It's no secret, Chris. I was not in favour of the second referendum position, and a number of us formed a group that was, in essence, trying to get a deal. First of all, Common Market 2.0, the Norway model, and then let's not go there. I mean,
it's all coming back. I'm getting the shakes. I'm getting the shakes.
It kind of triggers you. I'm sure it triggers. It's a done deal. But I suppose what I'm just trying to say is we have had a consistent position on this, and the colleagues that are in the group have shared those concerns for many years. It is a done deal now. What we have to do is be absolutely robust about whether or not the deal that's been negotiated by the Conservatives and by Boris Johnson is actually going to deliver for the British people.
You mentioned Keir Starmer there. Is he happy with this idea? Is he happy with what you're doing? It's not in any sense undermining his leadership, is it?
We've had really good conversations with his team, particularly in the strategy and policy side of the team. And it's been great, actually, to get their feedback, get their views. The key point with Renaissance is we are saying that Keir Starmer has laid very strong foundations. The Batley and Spen by-election, I really feel, was a turning point for the party. We've got to spring in our step now. But he can't do this stuff alone. He needs support. He needs colleagues who are ready to step up.
Don't you think, though, Steve, on that, he needs a battle with the left? He needs a fight. Your dad famously took on Militant and laid the sounding board for 13 years of Labour rule. I mean, do you not think that's where we are at the moment with this party, that you need to try and have a battle with the left and recognise that you have to start being electable, show you're electable to Middle England to win power?
The sequence for this, Chris, I really passionately believe this, and this was very much what drove my father as well, is what is right for the country. What is it that, and clearly the first step is a Labour government. In order to get a Labour government, we have to reconnect with the voters that we've lost. In order to do that, well, Renaissance is very clear about how that needs to happen. And it's, of course, going to be up to Keir and others to take that and we hope take it forward. if we're going to have arguments within the party, let's have them about competing visions for the future of the country. And if colleagues in the party choose to disagree with that position, okay. But the argument is, do you want to have a Labour government or not?
Yeah.
And everything has to flow from there.
And just finally, Renaissance is not an alternative power base for a Stephen Kinnock leadership charge, is it?
Absolutely not. This is about supporting Keir Starmer. He has laid strong foundations. Batley and Spen was a real turning point. But he can't do this alone. He needs our support. Ask not what the Labour Party can do for you. Ask what you can do for the Labour Party.
What a great ending. Stephen Kinnock, the chairman of this new group called Renaissance, thanks for joining us this week on Choppers Politics. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Well, that's all for this week, listeners. If you enjoyed this show, I know you have, please do leave us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps other people find this podcast. Thank you to my guests, Frank Lutz, Angela Richardson, and of course, Stephen Kinnock. Thank you to my producers, Louisa Wales, Elliot Lampitt, and Theo Luludis. But most importantly of all, thank you to you for listening. And please do buy a copy of the Daily Telegraph if you can. Until next time, though, cheerio!